Well, hello again, welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and if you're one of the brand new subscribers who have recently signed up in the last week, then welcome aboard, and I do hope you find my channel entertaining with regards looking at these old school vintage dirt bikes. Now, as I've said before, we are currently in the winter shutdown. All the racing is now all done and dusted for another season, and because we don't have any brand new bikes to show you throughout the winter, we're going to be delving into my video archives to bring you videos throughout the closed winter season. And this time we're going to go back to the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, and we have been attending that particular show for the last 5 or 6 years, and we've certainly filmed some very nice bikes during that period. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to go back into our archives and take a look at some more examples from that dirt bike show. So let's get straight into the video now and take a look at our first machine. Right, so let's go straight back to 2020 at the Telford show for our first bike, and this is a quite superb Rickman Metisse 500 that was built by Paul Balsili at Balco Motorcycles, and Paul specialises in building these very high quality bespoke old school type dirt bikes, and these specials don't just consist of a supplier chassis and a simple donor engine. Paul engineers one-off special parts to build his bikes, and I've covered quite a few of his creations here in the past, and in 2020, this was the first time that I'd been introduced to Paul's fantastic workmanship. So anyhow, this featured bike here is using a Rickman Metisse chassis and body kit, although I'm not exactly sure as to what this colour code is, but that's the thing with these Rickman Metisse chassis kits. If you can dream up a certain colour, then you can almost have your Rickman tank side panels and even mudguards done out in whatever colour you could imagine. But Paul's added his own Balco graphics to this bike just to give it its own look of individuality. But to make this particular Balco bike fly, Paul's using a twin-cylinder Triumph 500 4-stroke engine, but this particular Triumph motor isn't of course your stock 500, because this is a competition Triumph engine with custom made race cams, a 31mm Mikuni carburetor, and it has Electrek's world ignition system as well, and a few other quite nice upgrades to make this Triumph Twin quicker on the track. But as to the complete itinerary of what's actually been done to this Triumph motor, I wasn't given the full SP on the day, but you can see that it's had a set of stainless steel header pipes, all custom made to fit the engine, and those two sections of steel pipes connect onto what's just a short stubby tail cone that you can see here that exits just behind this right hand side number plate panel, and painted red as well to go with those red anodized alloy rims that the bike has on both the front and here at the back. But almost straight away you can see that there is some quite nice engineering that's gone into building this Triumph Metisse, and it's evident here on this rear brake pedal setup that yet more bespoke parts have been made for this machine. And once again here at the front of our Balco Scrambler. It's a pair of Italian Serianis, which once again are a very popular choice on these Rickman frame kits. And just in case you're wondering, those front and the rear hubs have been taken from a maico, whereby they've simply machined off the ribs on the hub and then polished up the alloy to give them a completely different kind of look. But our particular Balco Matisse Triumph also has a full lighting kit as well, with front and rear lights, and I expect that it'll be road registered as well, so you can either use it on or off-road, just to try and get the best value out of that £14,000 asking price that was on the bike back in 2020, although whether this bike was actually sold on the weekend of the show, I'm not sure. But anyhow, to sort out the suspension at the back of our Balco racer, Paul's fitted a quite nice pair of very good quality wide-bodied rock shocks, and these classic but modern engineered suspension units will be absolutely perfect for this Triumph off-roader. But certainly the more you look around this Rickman Matisse, the more you appreciate the many quality parts that went into its construction, which of course all reflects in that asking price, because these days you only get what you pay for, and this Balco here was without question built out of top quality components. Now, Paul had another superb specimen beside the Triumph Scrambler, and it was this 460cc Triumph Trials bike, which I thought was even more impressive than his previous Rickman machine. And in this instance here, I never got any details of the frame that the bike was built around, although it did have the oil in the chassis, just like the Rickman frames. And maybe if you're a trials expert, then you may recognise this chassis straight away. Although I did learn that the 460cc Triumph twin motor that powered this bike has one of the rare alloy twin barrels, and the transmission is one of the wide ratio type gearboxes. Now, one of the more outstanding features on this bike is the Triumph's intricate exhaust system, with those custom-made stainless steel header pipes, and of course this quite elaborate stainless steel tailbox section, which is, as you can see, a work of art in its own right, the way that it's all been cut, shaped and fabricated together. And once more, no airbox to speak of on this Triumph. It's enamel concentric carburetor that supplies the fuel and the air mixture with a simple screw-on type air filter at the back of the car. Now, again, I was never given the full specs of what's been done to this Triumph motor, but I'm assuming, again, that it's not just a simple Triumph twin, because more than likely this has had some quite nice tuning and internal work done to it. But another nice touch is this quite nicely sculpted alloy gas tank with the green Balco Triumph graphics to match, of course, those green anodized alloy wheels, and of course the bike's green seat as well. But nevertheless, if you had a spare £12,500 burning a hole in your back pocket, then you could certainly have wheeled this Balco beauty away from the show in 2020. And in my opinion, it was certainly worth every single penny, although whether or not, again, this Balco Triumph Trials bike was sold over that weekend, I'm not sure, but it's certainly a very nice looking classic. But as we move on from the vintage to the relatively modern, And this was another very nice bike I came across in 2020, and this one here is a brand new and unused 2004 Husaberg FC 450, a fantastic example of what in its day was certainly a highly desirable four-stroke thumper. And again here in 2020, this bike could have been yours if you could have come up with the 5,800 asking price, which to be fair is not too bad for a brand new and unblemished example. But as you're already aware, Husaberg was formed back in 1988 when Italian company Cagiva then bought over the Swedish Husqvarna company, who then simply moved all of their manufacturing to Varese in Italy, although some of the ex-Husqvarna engineers at the time stayed behind in Sweden to work on their own brand of four-stroke bikes. And it was in January of 1988 that Husaberg Motor AB was then established. Now, the Husaberg name, as I'm sure you're already familiar with, was actually taken from the town in Sweden where they first set up their company, which was basically just an old woodshed in the Swedish town of Husaberg. And in the following years, they went on to build some very interesting bikes. And in 1995, they were then bought over by the Austrian KTM factory. But there's no mistake that these Husaberg FC450s did have some quite high quality parts on them, like this kind of white power single rear monoshock suspension unit with the remote gas and oil reservoir there at the side of the shock. And as we move on to the front end, it was a pair of upside down white power suspension units as well, which for their time were definitely well suited to this big liquid cooled four-stroke racer. And these relatively modern suspension units were a far cry from those old conventional Serianis or Marzoccis that you used to get in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, when it came to stopping our Swedish four-stroker, it was an Italian Brembo twin pot modern hydraulic disc brake, which could certainly easily stand this heavy bike on its nose if the rider had the means to do so. But of course, normally I wouldn't feature these kind of bikes here on my YouTube channel, but for a 21-year-old machine, I suppose this will be one of the classics of the future. And to actually see a 2004 brand new bike in 2020 is certainly a bit of a surprise. And even with all of its modern day plastic surrounding it, these FC450s were, and I suppose still are, very popular with the riders who race their four-strokers. But there's no getting away from the fact that this is a superb looking specimen, and it would certainly make a great addition to anybody's motorcycle collection. Okay, so next up, it's a quite nice looking Spanish classic, and this time we're looking at a 1967 Montesa 250 Capra, another quite rare vintage racer, which, as I remember, I think only a few hundred of these Capra 250 models were actually made back in 1967. So the current owner of this bike told me on the day that I shot these clips that he bought this machine back in 1999 from a rider called Phil Colley, who lived in Dorset in the southwest of the country. And it said that this supposedly is an ex-works bike that was originally ridden by the great Charlie Harris in the 1960s. So when its current owner, whose name escapes me at the moment, first bought this bike in 1999. It wasn't in the best of condition, as you can imagine, after its initial 32 years of use, so he completely dismantled the bike and did a full restoration to bring it back to its almost original 1967 factory look. Although essentially the 67 250 Capra was quite a decent bike, as I remember, with a light tubular steel chassis and swing arm, and this piston port two-stroke engine was in the main okay, but there were a few reliability issues with some of the engine's internal components, which I think were attributed to the less than good quality metals that the parts were made from. Although certainly when this engine was running without any breakdowns, it was generally a good compact little two-stroke engine, and it was fed its fuel and air mixture through this Amal monoblock carburetor. And here on the other side of the motor we've got the now quite familiar forward folding kickstart, which of course was synonymous with many of Montesa's later models to follow. And once again, the front forks on these 250 Capras back in 67, I'm pretty sure, were Italian Serianis, which of course at the time were hugely popular on bikes all over Europe and even in the UK during that time period. And also here at the front we had this traditional drum and shoe type brake with that little vent air scoop there at the front to try and help keep those brakes cool. And at the rear it was quite a similar drum and shoe type setup, and you can see those cam adjusters there on the end of the rear wheel spindle so that you can adjust the tension of the chain. Now, the Capra's fuel tank in 1967 was of course made from fiberglass because at that time it was cheap enough to produce, and but very brittle of course if you got a substantial knock on the fuel tank. But other parts like the bike's handlebars and levers, controls and other bits and pieces do look like they're the right ones for 1967, which again are quite rare parts to find on an old bike such as this. But anyhow, the chances are that you're never going to be able to see one of these 67 Capras on the track due to their age and the fact that there were only a few hundred of them ever produced. So as you can imagine, this is a rare and very special bike and a model that any self-respecting collector again would love to own. But anyhow, from the super rare classic to the downright scary hybrid concoctions, and this next feature bike here is a kind of Frankenstein built machine that was put together to take part in hill climb and motorcycle sprint events. So this beast of a bike is another outrageous build by the guys at the Crazy Toys workshop, and it's an amalgamation of parts from different kind of off-road bikes, but essentially it's made up from a 1967 Bultaco chassis that's undergone quite major surgery in order for it to be able to fit in the 700cc two-stroke Zabel motor, an engine that, as you're aware, was very widely used on those three-wheeled sidecar motocross outfits because naturally the Zabel engine was a lot lighter than maybe a 2 or 4 cylinder 4-stroke, not to mention probably faster as well. But this 700cc German Zabel engine was also widely used on the American ATK Intimidators and of course in the late 1980s and early 90s on some of the later Maicos as well. But it's an absolute beast of an engine, and I can only imagine just how quick this bike will be off the line when it's doing those hill climbing sprint racing events, because I think it'll be far too much bike to use as something like an everyday motocrosser. Because if I remember, these Zabel 700s, I think were pumping out around the 70 horsepower mark, and that's before you even think about doing anything with the likes of tuning to these engines. So I'd expect you'd need balls of steel to try this thing on any kind of motocross track. But then again, as I said, this bike wasn't built to handle well or soak up big jumps or bumps on a rough motocross track. This bike here was made for one purpose, and that was to go fast forward and maybe even make the odd turn or two if you were brave enough to move the handlebars. But anyhow, some of the other parts on our Bultaco Zabel are these front forks, which have been taken from a 250 Kawasaki, with these ones here being the upside down variety and not the earlier kind of conventional fork setups. Now, the hub on the front is again from the aforementioned Kawasaki, with this twin pot Nissan hydraulic front brake as well, to hopefully do its bit to try and bring this rocket ship to a stop whenever it was required. But moving on to the rear of the bike, this alloy swing arm again has been through the surgery and it's had a bit of work done on it, but I wasn't told specifically what kind of work. But originally this swing arm came from a WR200 Husqvarna, and this rear wheel and hub again is borrowed from a big 610 Husky 4-banger. So you can see that this is without doubt one of those custom built machines. Now, because the radiator for the Zabel engine is located behind the motor, naturally all of the coolant hoses had to be rerouted to just in front of the fuel tank here, which I suppose in normal bike racing setups it's probably not a good place to fit a radiator behind an engine, but because our Speedster here is only used for very short sprints, then it's not really an issue. But you can go to the top of the class if you can guess just exactly what model of bike this fuel tank came off. Now, I will give you a short clue. It's not from a Bultaco, and most definitely not from a Maico either, because this alloy fuel tank here has been taken from a Ducati of all machines, although as to what model of Ducati bike I don't have a clue. But again, it's all been chosen to fit the Bultaco frame and to feed the big Zabel with all of the gas that it needs. Although, as I said, the bike has used many different dirt bike parts to construct it, including this alloy exhaust tailpipe, which has maybe even been taken from that aforementioned Kawasaki, and the engine radiator, as I spoke of, is just behind this plastic side panel, although as you can imagine it'd be crazy to use this thing as a motocrosser, but I expect that maybe on a short hill climb or timed sprint event, then this Zabel 700 would be quick enough by anybody's standard, and the biggest problem I think would be trying to hang on to this bike when it gets going. So you can see that this bike is certainly something different, which is really what the Telford show is all about each year. But when you take a look here, this is the pilot of this crazy bike, whose name I never actually got on the day, so apologies for that. But this is a man who rides this mental machine, and this other picture here with his eyes closed is probably him summing up enough courage to sling his leg over the bike at its next race event. Right, so let's conclude this particular look back at the Telford Dirt Bike Show and check out this 1977 250 Maico, which on the face of it and at first glance it may look like just any other 70s Maico that you've come across, although this one here is another super rare works maico, and again all part of the fantastic Norbert van Dun collection. Now, Norbert from Belgium has certainly one of the best and the rarest collections of German maicos in Europe, and I've certainly covered quite a few of his examples here on my channel in the past, but he always seems to come up with something that you've never ever seen before, and this Works 250 bike is yet another belter that I filmed at Telford in 2022. But let's start by taking a look at the frame on our 77-250, which is actually a frame from a 125 maico, although the inner and the outer diameters of the frame tubes is slightly different from the production 125 bikes. Now again, the area around the headstock has also been strengthened on this chassis to help it cope with those hard and punishing European race tracks. But another thing that you do notice about this custom factory chassis is that the footrest hangers were fitted to the chassis according to whichever factory rider was riding the bike at the time, and so each rider had their own preference where they wanted the footrests mounted. And on this left hand side you can see that the footrest hangers have been bolted to the frame rails, whereas if we go to the right hand side you can now see that the hangers are welded to the frame. So you can see just how this Works bike's chassis was being adapted to whomever was going to be riding it on the day. Now, with regards to the engine in this bike, I do know that this particular engine here was a pre-production prototype that was to be used on the following 1978 bike, and it said that there were only 12 of these factory Works motors cast at the maico factory, and I think 8 of these engines were used by the likes of Graham Noyce, Ivan van der Broek, Hans Maisch and Sylvain Gobert. So you can imagine that there can't be too many of these factory motors still in existence, so this is a quite rare item indeed. And as you can imagine, this custom built expansion chamber is another factory made part, and I think it's one of Hans Maisch's designs for this Works machine. And this front exhaust of course leads onto this tailpipe here at the rear with that removable end cap, so that you can remove the packing and then repack it and rebuild it when required. And here we have another part that you won't find on your 77 production maicos. It's this very simple triangular brake pedal that's been made from simple steel rod, all done to keep everything nice and light and cheap and functional, of course. And by all accounts, this pedal did work perfectly in a race situation. But you can see that it's a very simple part and, as I said, very functional. And actually, while we're still here at this part of the motor, one of the other things that you may have noticed is that this primary drive sprocket and its shaft have been moved further back towards the swing arm, which is of course again different from the production engines. But nevertheless, for 1977, some people would say that this was quite early to have an aluminium swing arm on a motocross bike, because I think up to then all of the maicos were using the tubular steel swing arms. But you have to remember that this was a Works machine, so it's never going to have the same parts as the production bikes that were sold to the public. So in its way, you can see that maico were ahead of the game by experimenting with these alloy swing arms during the 1970s. And in the front forks department, it's quite fair to assume that these maico forks were more than likely have been set up for whichever rider was going to use it, so I expect that parts like custom-made springs and different weights of fork oil would have been changed on a regular basis to suit each rider's personal settings. And again, here at the back, I'm not entirely sure as to the make and type of rear suspension that's fitted to our works bike here, but I do know that these 70s Maicos did have Italian Corticoso shocks with these remote reservoirs, so who knows, these could still be one and the same. Although the fuel tank here on our factory bike does look more or less the same kind of alloy coffin-shaped tank that were fitted to many of the mid-1970s Maico production bikes, so maybe this is just an off-the-shelf part, but maybe has a bit more fuel capacity to cope with those long, drawn-out GP races. So up here in the pilot's seat, we've got the period-correct Magura levers and grips, and once again I expect that the handlebars will be swapped and changed many times on this bike depending on who was scheduled to race it on a particular day. But our works two-wheeler still appears to have its 1970s Magura throttle assembly and grips, which is another rare part to still be able to find on one of these older Maicos. But anyhow, it's another fine and very rare example of a 77 Works Maico racer, and as I said, it's just one of the many unique and unseen Maicos that Norbert has tucked away in his collection, and I think Norbert's already invited me over to Belgium to film and take a look at his assortment of German Maicos, so who knows, that's maybe something that we could schedule in for a future feature on CDB TV. So there you go, that's our final bike for this look around the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. Another fantastic specimen from the Norbert van Dun collection, a 1977 250 Works machine. Okay, so these are just a few of the bikes that we're going to have a look at in our next video here on CDB TV, because we're heading back to the Westmoreland Motor Club's paddock and we're going to take a look at more of their vintage classics from the last 5 years of the club's classic scrambles. So these bikes and more are all coming up next on your number one and favourite Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.